Tell me, how did this happen? That I am at the point where this is all the green powder I have left in the house? I mean, this is it. This won't last me a day. How do I fix this? I make my own. Let me show you how. Hi, I'm Darcy from the Purposeful Pantry, and I want to be your dehydrating BFF. And what we're working on today is green powder. Now, this is not like the stuff that you get from some of the big brands that you see all the influencers promoting on YouTube and Instagram and stuff. This is true green powder that you can do at your house easily. You don't have to go off and source a bunch of odd, very nutritious greens that you have to try to figure out how to get and how to put into your meals. But this is this thing that I do with any dark leafy green that you can get. I dry them with my dehydrator and get all the greens done this way. Now, my family will not eat cooked greens most of the time. I can stick some in some meals. I can kind of sneak them in, and as long as it's not too much, they'll put up with it, but they don't like it. But there is no chance you're going to get any of us to eat like cooked collard greens. That's not going to happen. So in order to get these nutrients into my family that is important with all the vitamins and minerals and fiber that this contains, to get this in my family without having to shove a bunch of salad into them, which also doesn't happen in this family, we do it this way. We dry greens and then integrate it into everything I cook all day long, every single day, including brownies. So let me show you how to make this happen so that you can have this stuff to put in your family's meals and up those nutrients all the time. So here is my haul from yesterday's shop. I did run into a bunch of clearance bags of greens. So did I purchase them? You betcha. And here's a tip. If you don't have time to process these right away, and typically within a couple of days, these are going to hit their expiration date, which I tend to stick with bagged produce like this. You don't have time to process it. Throw it into your freezer, because when it comes out, you can do this whole same thing just like we're going to do with fresh. So let's walk through how to clean these and get them dehydrating. Okay, so the next thing I tend to do is I go through these really quickly to make sure there are no leaves in here that I wouldn't want to have in my food. Because, you know, sometimes you get some slimy ones at the very bottom. So we're good there. What I also do is I will just go through and cut them down to get smaller pieces. Now, these are going to shrink up like crazy, but I find it makes drying go a little faster. Plus, I can pack on into trays a lot better. So for the processing, rinse, lather, repeat over and over until you get your greens all the way done. Let's get them loaded on the trays. All right, so I'm basically just going to take all of these leaves and get them onto my tray. I am not going to do this like I would do a piece of fruit or other vegetables like that. I'm not going to try to make it to where they all kind of have some space so that they can get good airflow. So I'm going to pack this, and yes, this is piled on top of each other. It is not set with space apart. Is this going to matter? No, because what's going to happen? These are going to shrink up really fast, and then it's going to have plenty of airflow to get through all this. So I'm not worried about airflow in the same sense that I would be worried about fruit that sat for too long piled on each other and not getting enough airflow around to get things dry properly. And first tray, here we go. Now, if you run into issues like this where you don't have clearance and your trays are just getting jammed up, I have a trick for you. It's really easy. Let me see if I can do this one-handed. I can't. Let me take you back to the counter. All right, so here's our tray that is really piled up with greens. All you have to do is take another sheet of mesh, place right over it, and you can crush this down. So there you go. It just slides right in because that mesh helps keep everything down. You can see it right here. Yeah, my laundry room too. You can see everything in there. So when you put that tray in, it's not going to all force out the front. So while I cut this next batch, getting it ready, you could ask, can I just do this in my blender? Can I just run this through my blender or my food processor and grind it down better? You can if you want. If your goal is solely to get to powder, then you can do that. Make a kind of a little bit of a slurry out of it. You can add a little water to help slurry it up, and then just spread that onto your sheets to dry, and it'll work the same way. Then you powder that and you're good to go. The reason I don't do it is because I like to take this chunked bits of dried spinach and just take big handfuls of it and throw it into a meal that I'm making on the stovetop, or if I'm mixing it up into like an oven casserole, anything I'm doing like that. I want the bulk and I want that parsley look. I don't know how better to put it, but it's the smaller bits of spinach that are in there that add to the meal. So I don't want it always powdered. And I always know that I store better if I have larger chunks stored and make powder as I need it for a shorter amount of time. It will keep its nutrients that way. So also, somebody's going to ask, would I dehydrate iceberg lettuce? I'm going to give you this is romaine, so it's not quite the same. But if it's iceberg, you're never going to catch me dehydrating iceberg, because I think that the return for the amount of energy that I'm using for the nutrition that I'm going to get from that iceberg lettuce is not worth it. Yes, it has a few trace minerals and vitamins, and yes, it has fiber, but I'm going to get a bigger bang out of my buck for any leftover iceberg lettuce by tossing it into the compost pile or giving it to our rabbit, doing it that way, than I am going to be for dehydrating it. But you might find that in some romaine that you get these big chunky pieces of just white ends, like this maybe, or like this. I'm not going to take the time to try to pick them out. I'm just going to leave them in. They're going to work just fine. But if all I had were ends, like with iceberg, I just wouldn't take that time. So I'm going to take a little bit of the bulk off of this one and add it to my next one. I'm just going to put it in there with that. Some tips before we get started. This is the final project. I'm doing this part afterwards so I could show you what it looked like when I got done. The tip about this is that dry it low and slow. Now, typically you would do vegetables at 125 because that's the recommended temperature to get the fastest drying but keep the most nutrients. Keeping this at 95 means you keep all the nutrients in there. You're not going to dry it so much that the nutrients disappear. No matter what you hear some other companies say about their particular machines, you can still keep the nutrients with dehydrating. Keep it low and slow and you'll have all of them. Now, for those of you worried about eating raw greens all the time, typically, you add this into the foods that you cook so that this stuff gets cooked in your meals and you don't have to worry about it. It's going to cook. So those oxalic acids that are a problem with integrating nutrients into your system when you have too many of them, it's not the same problem. However, you can add this to your smoothies and to anything that you eat raw because you still eat salad sometimes, right? Or do you? Unless you're like us, we don't eat salads. But if you're eating salad, you're already eating this stuff raw as it is. So as long as you're not a kidney patient that needs to watch what happens with those oxalic acids, as long as you're not eating so much of this that you don't have to worry about it, okay? That's not an issue. So cook it. It's going to get cooked in your meals anyway, so don't worry about it. If you decide to dry it at 125, you're going to make a powder and it only goes into cooked meals, you'll lose those same nutrients once it's cooked anyway, so that's not a big deal. But because we do this a lot in things that are raw, especially in our smoothies, I just do it raw and let it be, and it gets cooked or not, so it's not a big deal. So let's get back at it. Okay, we are done, and here is our salad. Now remember how thick it was when I loaded the trays? This is what happens, how much it shrinks, which is why I say go ahead and load those puppies up because they're going to shrink to almost nothing here. All right, so here's what we're looking for. Good, crunchy, there we go, just like that. We don't want stems that are a little bendy still. We want no moisture in this whatsoever. So I hope you'll see how integrating greens into your family's meals is super easy with this. Now, how do I use this? All right, I will take a scoop of this and put it in eggs. I will take a scoop of this and put it into my casseroles that I may be cooking on the stovetop or in the stove. I will put this in my taco meat. I will put this in everything I cook. A tablespoon of the powder equals about a cup of fresh vegetables, or fresh greens, not vegetables, well, fresh greens. So you can start low by only adding a teaspoon at a time into something so that you know about what you're getting. Because after a while, depending on the food, it can make things taste a little grassy if you've added too much. So it's important that you kind of start slow, work your way up, and take notes about what you can add. We are at the point that I can add quite a bit of this before anybody starts to go, hey mom, that was a little too much green powder this time. It's like, okay, I'll back off next time. Then yes, do I put this in my brownies? I do put this in brownies. So I will add a tablespoon to a brownie mix, maybe a little bit more depending on how I'm feeling that day. It's one of those things that there is no recipe that you have to learn how to use this. It's add a little bit of something to everything you cook. What I wouldn't do is put this on my yogurt. That's me. I wouldn't do that, but you might want to. I don't put it in anything that's really light or that you want to keep the color and you need to keep that color. So does this go into my Alfredo sauce? Yes, it does. If I'm integrating into a whole, like if I'm doing Alfredo noodles and it's supposed to look like spinach anyway, because it will change the color of your Alfredo sauce. It's going to turn it a little bit green or you'll see green flecks. If you're trying to make Alfredo and you want to keep it a consistent light color, you might not want to add this for that because it will change the color some. It will make your eggs green. Great to do for St. Patrick's Day. And let's see I put it in soup. I put it in everything. I mean, literally everything that I cook, some of this goes in it. So what's going to happen in this family? This is going to go on repeat. I'm going to dry and dry and dry and dry and dry and dry. If I can get them on clearance, like I got these, then you betcha I'm going to grab those up and come home and dry them right away. But I'll have at least 4 jars of the quart jars of greens ready to go. I do not store this as a powder in anything larger than, this is a 1.5 pint jar, maybe a quart jar, because I do go through this relatively quickly, but I don't want to store it this way for long term because the more you process something, the more nutrients you're going to lose over time with it. So I like to keep things as whole as possible to store, then make up the powder as I need for a couple months at a time. This will probably last me 2 months, maybe 3 months, maybe. I don't think it's going to make it that long. So how long will the powder last? According to the National Center for Home Food Preservation, this should last you about a year. Okay? That's always one of those things that it's about. The thing is that you don't know how long it's really going to last in your environment and what the greens were like, how old they were, how new they were, all those kind of things can affect how long this will last. I tend to say 6 months to a year is going to be your range. Now, if you can open this up and you don't smell green when you're taking a whiff of it, it's old. If you can't crush it and smell green, it's old. If you can't taste green, it's old and you need to toss it or compost it because ours just goes back out in the compost for the garden. Then it's time to start a new batch. I hope you'll give this a try. So I'm going to give you a video right here that I want you to watch next on your dehydrating journey. And remember, nevertheless, she preserved. Happy dehydrating, and I'll see you again next time.